enjoying the sessions until now. I have really enjoyed them. And I have a star-packed panel. I really want to, these are the best and best in the business. So we'll really learn from them. They have been leaders of some really big organizations and they've had to build anti-fragile organizations. So we'll learn from them how they've been able to accomplish that. So as Pari said, and as further other sessions said, organizational anti-fragility is not just an attribute or merely a technical issue, right? It's not like a process because it's an unknown, right? So there is no process which you can have, but it's a social accomplishment, right? It's really that needs to be nourished through exemplary leadership, right? It's really how you build the leaders who are able to deal with those unknowns. So that's a clear sign of an organization which is ready for anti-fragility. It's more easily said than done because, as Nacheem Talib said, anti-fragility is beyond just resilience or robustness. And as most of us engineers, we like to have processes, like well-defined processes. In fact, India was supposed to save costs, right? So we want processes, productivity, efficiency. Whereas now we're talking about how do you deal with entire fragility. So it's almost the opposite of what we engineers are normally like to do, right? And so how do you get better in entire fragile organization? So one of the questions I want to start with is, Center of Excellence or GCOE demands a very high degree of autonomy in terms of leadership because of what we just talked about, yeah, which makes entrepreneurship a non-negotiable trait, right? We want people to be able to, down the organization, be able to make decisions, to be able to help the company. So, how do you think an organization can leverage its COE to foster that leadership? How do you ensure that that trickles down through the rungs of the organization? And maybe we'll start with the lady on the panel here, Vinita. So, you want to go with? Uh,
Thank you. Yeah, I think the autonomy is a given, right? We cannot have decision makers without the autonomy. So when it comes to the initial, trust building and all of that, that's when it's probably in question. As far as the other question that you mentioned about how does it translate down to the rungs of the organization, and the simple formula is the drive and the visibility of the leaders to their teams and beyond. So, as an example, our leaders from India, decision makers and senior leaders who are sitting right here in our India centers, are constantly in leadership meetings across the company, and it's very visible. Their drive, their entrepreneurial spirit, it's for all to see, not just for their teams in India, and that sort of helps it.
yeah. Dipesh, as I said earlier, our natural tendency as engineers or leaders is to create processes, well-structured processes. How have you been able to, while maintaining that, been able to bring this entire fragility? How are you able to help your leaders deal with this kind of uncertainties?
See, actually, you started with autonomy, and in a global COE centers like ours, the autonomy comes due to accumulated experience and credibility that we have built over the years, right? So it always starts with the center head or the COE leader who really sees challenges the status quo. I mean, first thing is to challenge the status quo, and then vividly describe, what is the future in hold for all the people here. And typically, this leader is from, has a DNA of the corporate headquarters because he is mostly grown there, homegrown leader. And then the first set of leadership already has the credibility, as Vinita said. But taking it to next level, where people are mostly, extremely good, technically, and they're like architects and so on, but bringing other capabilities like business, product, consumer, user experience. So bring all the other sets of skills that they need to be looked at as a 360-degree or what you call ambidextrous, kind of leader. Then they will do that transformation. So that's what I think leadership slowly is in Bangalore.
Right, right. Sumit, you are probably one of the most affected, and suddenly you told me when we had discussions that everything you do had to be at multiple times of what you were doing before. How has your leadership over the years which you have developed helped you deal with this issue? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah. Hi, everybody, and what a pleasure to be on the panel today. First of all, I'll start at a Tesco level. I work for Tesco, and in Tesco, one of the biggest thing we talk about is our purpose. In terms of why do we exist as an organization? And one of the purpose for us is to serve our shoppers a little better every day. So when pandemic hit us, one of the biggest things we did was how do we connect to that purpose? And anything and everything that we do must be connected to our customers. And as you can imagine, as Tesco, like many other retailers, it's very resilient business, especially if you're a food retailer. And with our volumes going up significantly, our online sale almost doubled itself in 4.5 weeks. What was important is to gear your organization to kind of support the business. And one of the things, especially if you think about our global centers, especially in India, India doesn't have Tesco, or colleagues who work in Tesco in Bangalore don't have the daily interaction with their customers or with Tesco as a business. So what was important to connect it to our purpose? And we talked about retail being a resilient business. And we also talked about how we have a responsibility towards that and feed nations that the markets that we serve in. So all our colleagues within the business were all geared up for a common purpose, which was feeding nations and serving our shoppers. How do we make the lives of those vulnerable customers? How do we impact the customers who are braving all odds to come into our shops to make their shopping trips a little better every day? So that was the whole purpose behind it. And that came from years of experience we had in terms of supporting Tesco, and also in terms of how we connected to the mothership in terms of the purpose of the organization.
Thank you. So Ravi, in product development and engineering, we are used in software development. We're used to doing agile, right? I mean, everybody's moving to agile. How do you make your entire COE agile, right? What have you done to make it so that it is able to be we do 2 week sprints and 3 week, weekly sprints, and have you been able to bring that into your leadership, into your other organization functions? What have you done to make that happen? I think Ravi, you are on mute.
Sorry about that. So you can hear me now.
Yeah.
That's very true. Everything's getting to be more agile. We talk about cloud a lot, and cloud is also synonymous for agility and speed. There's multiple levels at which you can answer that question. You can talk about the tooling, you can talk about skills. It's also about mindset of people. And you have to realize that when you're getting an entire COE together, the earlier speaker who spoke about ambidextrousness, right? You're almost thinking bimodal in these ways. You're kind of drawing upon your best strengths, the knowledge that you already have in your organization. A core value that you bring in there is getting the job done, which is what we count upon people to. But you're also starting to think about how can I go beyond? How do I think differently? How do I be more agile in my thought? Kind of folding those two things together is kind of what is very essential from a leadership perspective. You have to go beyond the experience you've had, because the experience in many cases can be quite legacy-like. And you're kind of building in new ideas. Are you open to bringing in these new ideas? And inevitably, when you do that, you have to make these two worlds merge in a very reasonable sense. And so we spend a lot of time on that. And it does come down to your values. If you can align to what the organization is doing, it's easy to say, you know what, we're all kind of going to change, or we're going to shift. We're going to do it fast because we know where we are heading. It's kind of about that simple, I would think, or complex. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Ravi. Vinita, coming back to one of the other things about Dell is that you guys are and most companies today talk about this around customer centricity, customer focus. What are the programs you are putting in place or have already put in place, which continuously reinforces that within the leadership, within your entire organization, which allows you to be more agile, right? Because if you know the customer well, you are likely to be more agile because you're always aware of the customer problem.
Nilesh. And yeah, customer focus has always been, like many other organizations, we're centric to the customer. But during these times, in the last 4.5 months, 3 things that have quickly stood out when it comes to the customer focus post-COVID, if I may say, and they are engagement, proximity not mattering, and productivity. And very quickly, if we look at engagement, initial phase, it was all about engaging with the customers. COVID has brought out the mutual empathy to its fullest for all of us and our customers. And for us, in particular for Dell Technologies, since we live and breathe digital transformation, showing what we have done over the last few years and how we did it was very important, as well as engaging. The conversation completely changed. We're obviously seeing more digital transformation in this last 6 months than ever before. Second was proximity to a customer, which is no longer a topic, right? Initially, it in the old world, I think I'm surprised now to see how that factor going away. Somebody mentioned earlier that we were trying to engage our employees across cubicles, but we find more engagement, not just from an employee's perspective, but from a customer's perspective, after the cubicles are completely gone away and we are all digital. So proximity to a site, location, totally not a factor. The talent pool is now all available, whether it is to help a customer or internally. And the third part, because we are so well into the remote work now, it's been a while, we're all settled from a perspective of working and being productive remotely. We are seeing much more productivity than ever. And as a quick example, we did 9 product launches in the last 9 weeks. And no travel has caused that much more availability of internal leaders for customers as well as internal. So it's a beautiful world right now. I think the customer connection has gone up many factors.
Dipesh, one other thing as a leader, when I was, just coming up as a manager first time, my manager walking around is the best way to do leadership, right? You walk around the cubes and all that. Hard to do that right now. Hard to travel, hard to do all of that. What have you changed, or how have you helped your leadership to be more effective leaders while this is going on?
So as we speak, I think we are learning. All of us are learning to to overcome this. But I think as long as the the key factor, the core is well defined, I think people can work remotely and easily. So if the definition is missing or confusing, then it's more harder to handle such situation. But for us, there are those defining moments as to why we are making this change. Like why are we agile to change our current situation? Once that is very, very clear to all our team members, after that, it doesn't matter whether they are sitting in next cubicle or whether they are working remotely. That's why I think what Sumit was saying, the purpose and the reason for change, if it is well defined, vivid, and the leader has to be the storyteller. He has to clearly tell the story of the future and be very persuasive. Once he does that initial length of 20-30% work, 70% is, I think, automatic after.
Okay. Sumit, how can we ensure that, this transformative leadership which we are all going through right now, as Dipesh just mentioned, we can sustain this? Or are we going to go back to our old ways of, so what have you done? Or are there things which you're putting in place now? Or what are things which you are thinking about, which you can help others, leaders, to think about, hey, these are the things which you are putting in? It could be the kind of leader people you hire. It could be the training programs you're putting in place. Or what are you doing to make that more sustainable?
That's a really good question, Nilesh. I think that's the conundrum which everybody's kind of back of everybody's mind. But to me, it's more fundamental than that. I don't think you can create leaders through training courses. I think it's the culture that you build within the organization. I know in the current climate, everybody's talking about digitalization, but I believe that there is always a step behind digitalization, which is the culture and the process of an organization. So culture is really critical. Culture is, as I would define, is how an organization behaves when the CEO isn't there. So how do you ensure that you create a culture which fosters leadership, which fosters the right behavior, fosters the right value that an organization wants to create? And one of that is key for me. The next 20 years, 30 years and beyond would be empathy. I think if you build a culture of empathy within the leadership, that helps. People talk about COVID. I say that everybody is in the same storm, but they're all on different boats because they're not. Everybody's problem is different. So if we build an empathy around this, if we understand each other's problems and deal with individuals differently, One of our values in Tesco we talk about is we treat people how they would like to be treated, which is about inclusivity and which is about how do we ensure that we understand each other's pain and not about treating everybody with a broad brush. I think that's critical. I think if we build those fundamental ethics, values, and principles within the organization, and one of them could be around how do we treat people, how do we create the leaders of the future, how do we get thrills around uh, creating the leaders of the future, and doing what is right than doing the right things. I think that's fundamental, because you could do the right things all the time but may not be the right things. To do what is right is the fundamental, and that ethics and values built in the organization is the fundamental to the success of the future.
Okay. Ravi, what advice would you give to a up and coming COE leader? What are some of the mistakes you may have made, or what are the things advice you may give to them to be successful for the first time they're getting into this kind of a position?
Or the advice that I might take myself as I get into it. One is, I think you need to be able to find an anchor. You need to be clear on where north is. That's very important. And there's so many to choose from. There's so many to choose from. Um, I think aligning to the value system of an organization is exceptionally important. I think you should know before you join the organization whether the value system of the organization is aligned to yours or not, right? You may have a very different mindset from your organization. So I'll talk about my journey at NetApp. The reason I've kind of latched on really well is, one, we care about people. And when we say that, it's not just about our employees, it's about our customers too, right? There's a lot of magic that happens if you really believe in that. To give you an example, right? In a really difficult time, when we were unclear whether we are able to manage movement of people into our own offices, we've kind of gotten 4 data center migrations done. You don't do that because it's coming top down, right? You get that because there's a leader in some place in a geography that aligns with the customer's value system, the company's value system, and says we've got to go get something done. That's one. Second, a lot of people have talked about empathy. It's very, very important. Take what happens on a daily basis today. Every time I'm talking to anyone, including you, including one of my teammates, think of it, they are inviting me home.
Mm-hmm.
How many times has that happened before this pandemic started? That you are invited into somebody's home. It's happening dozens of times every day, right? You have to realize that success is built on the backs of people. And I think we are learning what our people are like, what our people interactions are like today. With all this distance, we are learning that better than ever before. And I think so it's that, right? You have to be able to relate to people. You have to relate to the values of the organization. You have to know which way is north. You have to know to the extent at which you're going to go and help your customers be successful and what you stand for.
Okay. Okay. Uh, uh, so coming back to Vinita, are there any stories that stand out for you during what have you in your career as a leader, which you would like to share with the audience?
Several stories. Which theme? I think I'll go with the empathy theme because it is super critical at this point of time. So, not a story, but my personal mantra or an aha moment I had on empathy. While we all like to think we are very empathetic, but a good test of this, and especially very very valid in these times, is that fundamentally we look at others, right? We judge others based on their actions, but we judge ourselves based on our intent. So for me, this is a very underlying thread to constantly keep in check. That each time I'm looking at the person in front of me, can I just flip it over? Can I look at their intent, and can I judge myself on my action? That has helped increase the empathy level. I think it's a whole pool over there. You can never say you arrived and you're highly empathetic, but if you have to constantly build it, that has worked for me across my professional journey very well.
Great, thank you. Dipesh, one of the things which I learned from one of the leaders I really respect is uh, that leadership is more influence. It's not power. It's you have to be influential both up and down the organization. Uh, how have you helped your leaders, or what has made you successful being influential in the company?
One is, of course, accumulated, experience and credibility. I mean, that's the first one. And even though it's easier said, very hard to earn is trust. Uh, when those defining moments are there, what have your actions been? That like lingers over years, as long as you're in the organization. So you cannot mess up those defining moments when the whole organization is looking up at you, customers are looking up at you, various stakeholders are looking up at you, and you should take the right call and bold calls. That has helped so far. I'm learning.
Great. Sumit, one of the things which Pari, I don't know whether you were able to see Pari's presentation or not, but he talked about there's a lot of opportunities which GCOEs have today because of US-China issues, because of the amount of influence or the consumerization of Indian population, right? The investments which Geo just got. Are there things which you think that GCOs could be doing more, and maybe taking Tesco as an example? What are the GCOs in India could be leveraging more, even more, or influencing even more across the world? So.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think number one, I think we always talk about talent war, especially in India. I think the war is over. The talent has already won the war. So we don't need to really focus on that. I think the focus we need to have is how do we create as leaders an environment of success for those talent so that we can retain them. Number one. Second thing, how can we adopt and adapt to change and forget about labor arbitrage? I think it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's 20 years ago. I think it's about value creation. How do you create value and move up the value chain within an organization and create value for the shareholders? I think that's what we need to think about. And thirdly, how do you create leaders of the future? Because if you don't create leaders of the future and you can't export talent into the markets that you serve in, I think you failed as a GCC or GOC, whatever you want to call it. I think those are the kind of fundamental building blocks. One is, as I said, leadership. Second one is about creating value. And the third one is about building the right culture that helps drive innovation and retain the talent who has already won the war.
Great. And Ravi, we're going to end with you. Any thoughts about where is NetApp? How is NetApp going to leverage the GCO even more? Can you give us some ideas which so others can learn from that?
So we've reached, I think, an interesting point. I think, as a lot of people have said, about 2 decades ago, it was about talent at low cost. Then it was talent at volume, right? You just had that. If you look at it today, the conversation at NetApp, whether you're sitting in Tel Aviv, whether you're sitting in Reykjavik, Iceland, whether you're sitting in Vancouver, Sunnyvale, our headquarters, or Bangalore, it's the same. What is the value that you can create for our customer? We're sitting in a very dynamic environment. The world is changing faster now than we thought it was even a few months ago. This whole acceleration towards digitization, acceleration towards cloud, it's only gathering more and more momentum. So the question each one of us as technical leaders have to ask the question is, how am I adding that value for customer? Not for site, not for team, not for country. How are you doing it for customer? I'll give you an example. We had an accelerator event a few weeks ago, a few days ago actually, when we were talking to our startups. Indian startups are serving global customers. The customer is global, right? So I think this whole notion of a national boundary, this needs to vanish. You have to start talking about how you're going to serve that one customer and how you're going to allow them to change the world. That's what it comes down to. It's just that simple.
Thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate your time. This is great. Awesome. We had an awesome panel. And I wish we had more time, but hope to keep in connection with you all, and looking forward to more discussion on this topic. And hopefully, as Pari said, we are able to use an opportunity, this disaster or whatever we're going through, as an opportunity to even make more impact across the world. So,
thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.